Hello everyone. The lives of the most inbred ladies in medieval history are the subject of our first discussion tonight. These women were caught up in the royal custom of keeping things in the family, both politically and genetically, as they were born of cousins, married to uncles, and sometimes both. Please take a moment to like and subscribe to the video before you settle in, but only if you truly like what I do here. The third child of two powerful and closely related individuals, Juana of Castile was born in 1479. The same powerful couple that funded Columbus, drove away the Moors, and somehow believed that cousin marriage was still a wise strategic choice were her parents, Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile. The Spanish Trastamara dynasty, from whom Juana was descended, had a long-standing custom of in-family marriage. The royal bloodline had been roused enough by the time she got there to be considered alive, but not enough to prevent problems like emotional instability, persistent depression, and the odd, unlucky chin. Juana was sent to Flanders when she was a teenager to wed Philip the Handsome, who was actually a less attractive and more genetically enhanced Habsburg. She had a relative named him. He was, of course. Crown collection and disregarding genetic warnings were two of the Habsburgs' favorite pastimes. It seems promising at first. Juana was a bright, attractive woman who was apparently deeply in love with Philip. Regretfully, Philip had a stronger affection for all women other than his wife than he had for her. A court used to chilly marriages and ambivalent loyalty didn't like Juana's fervent personality and jealousy. Juana was upset when Philip passed away unexpectedly, supposedly from typhoid, but perhaps it was karma. She resisted being taken away from his body. No. She travelled throughout Spain with his casket in tow, opening it now and then to see how he was doing. Perhaps medieval romantic, perhaps unhinged too. This behaviour was seized upon by her political adversaries, of which she had enough. It was cited as evidence by her father Ferdinand that she was unqualified to govern. Charles, her son, and the future Holy Roman Emperor Charles V followed suit. As she spent the majority of her life in care in a convent, both men were able to conveniently rule in her place. Was Juana really crazy? Historians continue to argue over it. Some claim that her mental disorder was made worse by incarceration and sadness. Others contend that she was simply politically awkward in a society that viewed emotional women, especially those who exposed their husbands' infidelity, as treasonous. In any case, Juana was more than just a tragic person. She was the result of dynasty inbreeding, royal pressure, and the worst coping strategies in the world. The trophy would be held by Maria Anna of Spain, as her son drooled over it if there were a reward for the most foreseeable genetic outcome. King Philip III of Spain and Margaret of Austria, who were also cousins in that peculiarly impassioned Habsburg fashion, were the parents of Maria Anna, who was born in 1634. Maria Anna married her uncle, of course. That is correct. Her real uncle, Ferdinand III, Holy Roman Emperor, is not a distant cousin or a second cousin twice removed. Why not put forth even more effort when your family tree is basically a loop of ambition? Maria Anna was multilingual, politically conscious, bright, pious, and seemed to have a kind heart. She introduced the genetic equivalent of photocopying a photocopy, as well as dignity, to the imperial court. What is her greatest historical contribution? Giving birth to Spain's Charles II, who is possibly the most inbred king or queen to have ever occupied a throne without losing it. The Habsburg gene backlog, an enlarged jaw, a weak chin, infertility, chronic disease, and a potential cognitive impairment were all passed down to Charles in addition to the crown. He had trouble with everyday tasks like eating and speaking, which is understandable before coffee, but less so when you're in charge of a large international enterprise. Was Maria Anna to blame for all of this? Obviously not. She contributed to the long-standing family custom of transforming political connections into genetic daredevils, but she did not create Habsburg matchmaking. She deserves praise for having a strong affection for her kid and for being protective of him during his vulnerable life. In her role as regent during his minority, she attempted to protect him from court manipulation, which was akin to attempting to break up a food battle among dagger-wielding famished infants. A year after the death of her son, Maria Anna passed away in 1696. She contributed to the decline of the Spanish Empire, which eventually crumbled into the War of Spanish Succession, which was partly caused by Charles II's inability to have children, because he couldn't, of course. Isabella of Habsburg is the solution to the question of what occurs when a family views marriage as a formula that can be calculated using a spreadsheet. Isabella was born in 1501 and was the daughter of Juana of Castile, also called Joanna the Mad, though perhaps Joanna the Understandably Stressed would be a better name at this point, and Philip the Handsome, yep, that one again. Isabella became the niece of half of Europe and the sister of Emperor Charles V as a result. Her DNA was less mysterious and more like an over-repeated royal recipe, with a base of Habsburg, a hint of Trastamere, and no fresh ingredients at all. Isabella married Christian II of Denmark when she was 17 years old. He was a monarch who was well known for his reform initiatives, unpredictable actions, and overall attitude of a man who was only a bad breakfast away from waging war on the furniture. As was to be expected, their union was both extremely awkward and strategically sound. Of course, Isabella and Christian were cousins, but the fact that her Habsburg ancestry was already playing like a medieval screensaver was what actually clinched the genetic deal. In addition to providing political benefit, stability, and charm, she was supposed to cover up the fact that her family tree was beginning to resemble a wreath. Isabella did not have an easy life at the Danish court. Christian's reign was a failure. He was deposed, put in jail, and briefly banished. Isabella faithfully followed him, which may be attributed to either inherited stubbornness or pure love. Years of court drama and political exile caused her health to deteriorate, and she passed away at the young age of 24 from what some believe to be illness or birthing issues made worse by stress and royal politics. Their offspring carried on the honourable custom of naturally inbreeding. If the dynasty treasured anything more than titles and jawlines, it was making sure that no family gathering ever required name tags, which is why one of them, Dorothea, married Frederick II, Elector Palatine, a strong Habsburg match. Being born in 1498, Eleanor of Austria is already at a disadvantage because she is caught between 1,000 royal aspirations and the Renaissance. She was Charles V's older sister and the proud possessor of what can only be called excellent Habsburg genetics. She was the daughter of Philip the Handsome and Juana of Castile. Her early years, a waiting room for diplomats, her adolescence, and several near marriages. Henry VIII of England was once promised her, but that deal fell through. She's lucky. One of the few instances where Habsburg inbreeding might have unintentionally raised someone's standard of living was avoiding that specific marriage. Rather, Eleanor's first marriage was to Manuel I of Portugal, who was not only a significantly older man but also her first cousin, once removed. This is essentially the medieval equivalent of marrying someone from down the hall in the context of royal matrimony. She had 2 children, became Queen of Portugal, and was widowed before turning 30. Naturally, the answer was to marry her off once more, this time to Francis I of France, a man her brother Charles V had previously imprisoned. Ah, romance. Eleanor was not a favourite of Francis's, who saw her more as a political pawn with a Habsburg return address than as a wife. They had a cold, childless marriage. Eleanor read, prayed, and politely pretended not to notice, while Philip spent more time with his mistresses than with his queen. You can't blame Eleanor for sticking to her Habsburg heritage, even if she was married to the King of France. Despite their inbreeding, they were predictable. After retiring peacefully into the political shadows and outliving both of her husbands, Eleanor passed away in 1558. In addition to her exceptional ability to weather 2 royal weddings without sparking a scandal, an Olympic feat in her family, she was renowned for her piety and poise. Her life served as an example of silent perseverance. She fulfilled the role of the Habsburg woman, marrying the cousin, bearing the heir, and acting as if the familial resemblance wasn't growing stronger with each generation, even though she didn't start any conflicts or controversies. Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile, Spain's power couple and occasional genealogical bottleneck, welcomed Catherine of Aragon into the world in 1485. Catherine had it all as a princess of 2 unified kingdoms: money, education, titles, and a family tree that encircled more tightly than a drinking song from the Middle Ages. Why was Catherine already engaged to Henry VII's eldest son, Arthur, Prince of Wales, by the time she turned 3? Because it was a lovely custom of European royal houses to marry cousins to cousins, ideally those who shared the same coat of arms. Through John of Gaunt, Catherine and Arthur were second cousins, which is essentially hardly connected in a noble sense. After they were married in 1501, Arthur passed away 5 months later. Were there any relationships involved in the marriage? For years, that question would confound lawyers, define English history, and ignite the Reformation. Meanwhile, as a teenage widow living in England without a husband, without her dowry returned, and yet very much a piece in the game of royal alliances, Catherine found herself in diplomatic limbo. Arthur's younger brother, Henry VIII, who would later become her second husband, enters the picture. You don't marry 2 sons from the same family very often. However, it appears that the Trastamaras were all about recycling names, titles, and spouses. Their formative years were truly loving. Catherine was politically astute, elegant, and intellectual. After years of heartbreak and miscarriages, Catherine was unable to give birth to a son, but she brought Henry dignity, an alliance with Spain, and 5 pregnancies, only one of which survived, Mary, later known as Mary I. Things escalated from awkward to apocalyptic at that point. Because Catherine, having previously been married to his brother, Henry asserted that their marriage was void. With the Pope's support, Catherine maintained that it was legal. This sparked the most spectacular annulment request in history, complete with political threats, theological arguments, and one resolute king who founded his own church in order to avoid it. Catherine, who insisted until the end that she was Henry's legitimate wife, was exiled, deprived of her title, and made to spend her remaining years alone. She had blue royal blood, but it was oddly concentrated. Her marriage served as a reminder to everyone that marriages within the family tree rarely end amicably, rather than through conflict or diplomacy, helping to create English history. The only child of Mary of Burgundy and Emperor Maximilian of Austria, Margaret of Austria, was born in 1480. Her family tree was essentially a circle drawn by a crown-wearing, ambitious kid because she was a Habsburg from birth. Strategic packaging was the focus of Margaret's life from the beginning. She became engaged to Charles VIII of France when she was 3 years old. When Charles chose to wed Anne of Brittany, who had superior geography, she was returned at the age of 12 as an unsuitable wedding present. According to reports, Margaret said, "I shall be revenged after being humiliated but remaining calm." To her credit, she went on to dominate half of Europe, so fair play. Her second engagement was to Juan of Castile, who was, of course, her cousin and the son of Ferdinand and Isabella. The goal of the match was to maintain the shallowness of the gene pool while solidifying Habsburg-Spanish relations. Juan passed away soon after they were married, and Margaret, who was still under 20, had now been turned down twice by royal husbands, once voluntarily and once by fate. Margaret turned down offers from other suitors, including one of Henry VII's sons. Officially, she was no longer playing the royal marriage roulette. She never remarried, choosing instead to focus her life on art, statecraft, and surviving her family. No easy task. Margaret was appointed governor of the Netherlands by her nephew, Charles V, and she managed the area with a combination of diplomacy, intelligence, and Habsburg tenacity. Perhaps because her last name was Habsburg, and because she wasn't preoccupied with giving birth to her uncle's cousin's heir, she was one of the few women in Europe who was truly trusted with power. She negotiated treaties and balanced unstable regions. Margaret had a largely scandal-free life despite the never-ending dynastic upheaval all around her. She supported music, gathered artwork, and even made an effort to educate young Charles the fundamentals of governance, a valiant endeavor given that he was emperor by the age of 19 and had ties to practically everyone on the earth. Medieval medicine was essentially a fancy way of stating that you'll probably die from that, and Margaret died in 1530 when a relatively minor foot ailment proved deadly. Despite the fact that her pedigree was still quite inbred, she is nevertheless one of the few Habsburg women who is recognized more for her policies than for her lineage. In 1188, when Blanche of Castile was born, aristocrats still viewed marrying your cousin as a power play rather than a biological risk. Blanche came into the world with more royal blood than hemoglobin because she was the daughter of King Alfonso VIII of Castile and Eleanor of England, and the granddaughter of Eleanor of Aquitaine and Henry II of England. Her family was already planning which relative she would marry before she was even able to walk. The victor? Her cousin was Louis VIII of France. Christmas is more than simply a third cousin twice removed. More like, should we still do this because we have grandparents in common? Naturally, though, this was medieval royalty, and it was deemed poor diplomacy if your betrothed did not share a family tree branch with you. Blanche came to France at the age of 12 to wed Louis, whose father, King Philip II, is believed to have remarked, "She is small, but she will grow." Charming. Blanche's marriage in 1200 set her on a path of dynastic chess, religious zeal, and tactfully disregarding the reality that the majority of her husband's ancestors were also hers. Blanche was more than a ceremonial person. She was the queen consort when Louis became king, and she was the true force behind the kingdom following his passing. She governed France as regent for her young son, Louis IX, who would go on to become Saint Louis, and she was well aware of the instability of her extended family. She overcame barons who questioned her because she was a woman and a little more Castilian than they liked, while organizing crusades, quelling uprisings, and maintaining the country. She responded with force, diplomacy, and sometimes house arrest. Blanche symbolized decades of genetic consolidation. French, English, and Castilian all blended into one resolute young queen. Her caution light would have been blinking frantically if DNA had one. She was devout, passionately guarded her kids, and definitely not to be taken lightly. Blanche was responsible for keeping Louis IX alive long enough for him to be declared a saint. Born in 1503, Anne of Bohemia and Hungary was born with half a crown and half a family reunion in her veins, according to Habsburg terminology. Although Anne of Foix-Candale might seem like a genetic breath of fresh air, don't be misled. Her parents were Vladislaus II of Hungary and Bohemia. There was still a lot of royal repeat relations in this organized mess. Knowing from an early age that she would one day be married off like an especially expensive diplomatic suitcase, Anne married her double first cousin, Archduke Ferdinand of Austria, who would go on to become Ferdinand I, Holy Roman Emperor, in 1521 when she was 18 years old. That's correct. They are essentially a mirror match, sharing both sets of grandparents. Nowadays, some people would be surprised if you married your double first cousin. It increased dynastic stability and, maybe, the incidence of birth abnormalities in the Habsburg world. You mean priorities? The union was politically ideal despite the genetic hazards. It brought the Habsburgs together with the Hungarian and Bohemian crowns. It also gave birth to 15 children. Yes, 15. Why not do it completely if you're going to combine royal bloodlines? As the glue in a huge European political jigsaw puzzle, Anne herself was characterized as religious, polite, and dutiful, another way of saying she didn't complain. Depending on which region of Europe needed a reminder that the Habsburgs were still in power, she held court in several places and accompanied Ferdinand on his several imperial journeys. She was also still very much a supporter of family weddings. Unfortunately, Anne passed away at a young age in 1547, perhaps exhausted after a lifetime of child-rearing, politicking, and feigning her family's lack of violent infatuation with itself. Although she did not survive to witness Ferdinand's coronation as Holy Roman Emperor, the Habsburgs had effectively seized Central Europe via her. The life of Anne of Bohemia and Hungary was a case study of elite inbreeding. She was born into a dynasty that produced half of Europe's emperors while prioritizing boundaries over biology and stability above sanity. During the mid-14th century, when Joanna of Naples, also called Joanna I, was in power, marrying your cousin was not only trendy, but also essentially a nobility survival tactic. Joanna was triple-stamped with royal legitimacy and at least 2 layers of cousin marriage residue when she was born in 1326 to Charles, Duke of Calabria, and Marie of Valois. Her family tree resembled a Mediterranean spaghetti bowl with the Angevins of Naples on one side and the French house of Valois on the other. Inevitably, her marriage prospects were also kings and cousins, just as her uncles and cousins were. Naturally, Andrew of Hungary, Joanna's cousin, was her first husband. The Pope arranged the marriage, which was an unpleasant political match that rarely leads to a happy marriage. In Naples, Andrew was said to be as popular as plague rats, unpopular and brash. The Neapolitan nobility and Joanna were not overjoyed, and shortly after Andrew was crowned co-ruler, he was killed, most likely, with Joanna's knowledge, if not her approval, by strangling him with a curtain cord. It is what we will refer to as mutual incompatibility. 3 further marriages followed, to her cousin Louis of Taranto, her cousin James IV of Majorca, and the scandalous minor noble Otto of Brunswick-Grubenhagen, who had shockingly little blood ties. Joanna interfered 4 times if marrying into your own family was an Olympic sport. Joanna was an influential figure in politics. She oversaw Naples independently, opposed the Pope, and backed changes in a highly corrupt state. At one time, she was even excommunicated for supporting the incorrect Pope during the Western Schism. When the Vatican wants you dead and your relatives want you dead, you know you're doing medieval politics correctly. Another relative, Charles of Durazzo, eventually overthrew her by invading Naples, imprisoning her, and having her suffocated to death with a pillow, which would have appeared strangely familiar considering her history with marriages and families. Joanna of Naples married her way through several family lines, governed fearlessly in a world dominated by men, and passed away in the embrace of a person who most likely shared her great-grandmother. Because the Habsburgs were now less of a family and more of a regulated genetic experiment with a crown budget, Isabella Clara Eugenia was born in 1566 as the daughter of Philip II of Spain and Elizabeth of Valois, a marriage between close cousins. Isabella was being prepared to reign from the time she could wield a pen, which in Habsburg parlance meant learning religion, diplomacy, and how to disregard the fact that half-uncles were officially your cousins. Philip II, her father, loved her very much. This could be due to her intelligence and composure, or just the fact that she refrained from trying to rebel or get married outside the family. Although she was regarded as a formidable contender to inherit the entire Spanish Empire, her destiny would depend on her marriage, to another Habsburg, of course, due to the bothersome problem of male predilection. After a while, she married her cousin, Archduke Albert of Austria. Welcome to your first day of studying European royalty, if that caught you off guard. They were named co-sovereigns of the Spanish Netherlands together, which is a nice way of saying that you get to run a politically unstable area and put up with constant uprisings while answering to Madrid. Isabella was able to rise to the challenge. She controlled with the sagacity, religious fervor, and composed concentration of someone who had committed all of the papal encyclicals to memory while still finding time to supervise her courtiers. Perhaps because they had enough DNA in common to be able to converse telepathically, her marriage to Albert was said to be happy, or at least tranquil. Isabella continued to administer alone as governor on behalf of the Spanish crown after his death in 1621. She dressed like a nun and made religious vows, but that didn't stop her in the least. She maintained a functioning post office, handled peace accords, and kept the provinces somewhat loyal. Indeed, she was trusted by the Habsburgs to manage logistics, revolt, and war. That is essentially becoming a saint. Isabella was regarded as one of the most capable monarchs of her era until she passed away in 1633. During her reign, Habsburg inbreeding produced competent rulers rather than merely unpredictable rulers with twitchy chins. The sole child of Charles the Bold, Duke of Burgundy, and Isabella of Bourbon, Mary of Burgundy was born in 1457. Her bequest? The hope that she would marry another noble with similarly recycled DNA, a sizable portion of European land, and a family line that took pride in aristocratic marriages with well-known surnames. Mary was abruptly put in control of the wealthiest and most politically unstable duchy in Europe after her father, Charles the Bold, was killed in battle when she was only 19. The French, the Habsburgs, the neighbors, and especially the cousins, all desired a piece of Burgundy. Mary married Maximilian of Austria, the future Holy Roman Emperor, and of course her second cousin once removed, in order to bring stability to the situation. By Habsburg standards, it was a good match, and the family was essentially the only people in the dating pool. Politically, the union was excellent. Mary received a dynamic husband who could negotiate a treaty and wield a sword, frequently in the same afternoon, while Maximilian gained access to the Burgundian domains. According to reports, it was affectionate while being a power struggle, which is absolutely obscene by the standards of arranged marriage. Her reign, however, was brief and dramatic. Courtiers who believed that a woman should not be permitted to rule unless she was also sowing something, French aspirations, and rebellious Flemish cities all put constant pressure on her. Mary resisted, signing the great privilege to give her subjects more rights, standing by her side with her husband, and conducting the medieval equivalent of managing a Fortune 500 corporation while carrying a baby on one hip. Then catastrophe struck in 1482. Because nobles frequently prefer to play with fatal injuries for fun, Mary fractured her back when she fell off her horse while hunting, and she died at the age of 25. It was an abrupt, sad conclusion that left Europe rushing to assert possession of their children and Maximilian in black. Her passing marked a sea change. Through her son, Philip the Handsome, Burgundy, once a sovereign powerhouse, was absorbed into the Habsburg Empire. That Philip, indeed, the one who gave half of Europe his jawbone after marrying Joanna the Mad, the sole surviving child of Emperor Charles VI, Maria Theresa of Austria, was born in 1717, and her birth was shrugged off by the royal family because she wasn't a son. The Pragmatic Sanction, a beautiful imperial decree that essentially declared, yes, I know she's a woman, but she still gets the empire, okay, was issued by Charles, who was always optimistic, or maybe just naive to European politics. Europe was not happy about that, spoiler alert. Maria Theresa inherited the expansive Habsburg dominions and a diplomatic disaster upon the death of Charles VI in 1740. Almost all of the European powers contested her authority. Why? For being a woman with a crown who hadn't yet married a first cousin, she had the gall to do so. She actually had? Scratch that. Since Francis Stephen of Lorraine was, in fact, her distant cousin, Maria Theresa married him. They had 16 children together, including Marie Antoinette, future queens, and emperors. The let-them-eat-cake one, that is. With so many children, Maria Theresa not only inherited the throne, but also all of the chromosomes. Don't be misled, though. This was no pampered king or queen concealed behind velvet drapes. One of the most successful leaders of her time was Maria Theresa. While pregnant about every other year, she modernized education, centralized administration, restructured the military, and redesigned taxes. This type of multitasking makes even contemporary supermoms appear to be part-timers. However, she was still a Habsburg, which meant that she was reflexively inclined to marry her children into the same few households repeatedly, practiced strict Catholicism, and micromanaged to a healthy degree. The outcome? All of Europe was now covered in an even more tightly woven web of Habsburg cousins, which resembled an aggressively produced royal ivy. Having outlived her husband, survived several wars, and made sure the Habsburg name remained emblazoned on the continent for another generation or 5, she governed until her death in 1780. Her genetic legacy persisted in marching obstinately into the Enlightenment, and her son Joseph, also known as Joseph II, Holy Roman Emperor, inherited the empire. Yolande of Aragon, the daughter of Violent of Bar and King John I of Aragon, was a princess from birth to grave. She was born in 1384. Her family tree was inherently less tree-like and more repetitive, with half of your relatives serving as possible in-laws. In other words, she had more aristocratic surnames than most people had teeth. Yolande had the most regal upbringing possible. She was politically astute, intellectual, and dangerously outspoken by medieval standards. Because of this, she was a nightmare for anyone hoping for a calm queen, as well as a valuable dynastic treasure. Her union? Yes, she is related to the French prince Louis II of Anjou, because mutually loving great-grandparents are the epitome of true love. Yolande was never one to sit still and embroider coats of arms, even if she was officially the Queen Consort of Naples and the Duchess of Anjou. In addition to financing armies and forming alliances behind the scenes, she was one of the few royals who were able to back Joan of Arc and endure the political fallout. Yolande was in charge while her husband gloated over claiming thrones he couldn't actually hold. She was the real power in Anjou, managing estates, negotiating treaties, and raising troops. She carefully ensured that her offspring had the political benefits and just enough Habsburg ancestry to be seen as legitimate before marrying them off to other royals, frequently relatives. Perhaps because he only received a portion of her family's chromosomes and his mother's intellect, her son, René of Anjou, came to be known as the Good. Yolande gained power over the French throne, and, more significantly, the ability to control Joan of Arc's military expeditions without ever using force when her daughter Marie wed Charles VII of France. Yolande was more than a name embroidered on a royal tapestry. She was one of the few powerful ladies in the Middle Ages who did not formally occupy a throne. As Yolande stood behind each feeble monarch and aspirational general, occasionally rolling her eyes and making corrections to the map. She outlived marriages, adversaries, and the worst of the 100 Years' War before passing away in 1442. Sure, she was inbred, but she was also sharp, cunning, and just as powerful as the kings she subtly outplayed. Richard Plantagenet, Duke of York, and Cecily Neville, Two individuals so aristocratic that they could hardly walk into a room without stumbling over their own insignia were the parents of Margaret of York in 1446. Margaret's DNA was predisposed to intrigue, daring choices, and intimate courtship because she was the sister of Edward IV, Richard III, and about half of the War of the Roses. Thus it goes without saying that she wed Charles the Bold, Duke of Burgundy. He was renowned for his fearsome military fixation, ambition, and, most importantly, for being another cousin in the pan-European gene loop. In 1468, their union was more about unsettling France than it was about romance. Charles brought, well, a really sharp beard and relentless tenacity, while Margaret brought English reputation. Their marriage was said to be courteous, and even, dare we say it, functional despite the political matching. The Burgundian court, which was less dusty medieval and more pre-Renaissance Instagram influencer, with its silks, tapestries, small dogs and dangerous fixation with stitching, was a surprise place for Margaret to fit in. She soon gained the moniker Great Lady of the Netherlands for her wit and diplomacy. She hosted guests, oversaw court finances, and even answered letters when Charles was out doing his own thing, typically instigating wars he couldn't win. Margaret didn't pack up her gowns and retire once he died, as was to be expected in battle. No, she stepped up even more. She became an advisor to her stepson-in-law, Maximilian of Austria, and the regent and guardian of her stepdaughter, Mary of Burgundy. Indeed, that is the Maximilian who wed Mary and, like a particularly arrogant virus, spread the Habsburg name to even more European branches. Despite not having any offspring of her own, Margaret had a significant impact on dynastic politics. If you're wondering where that dynasty's streak of chin-heavy, self-important ambition began, it was Margaret who raised Philip the Handsome, the man who married Joanna the Mad, and eventually gave birth to Charles V. She outlived her siblings, the majority of her adversaries, and the waning Burgundian Golden Era before passing away in 1503. You may be sure that she tightened the inbred family knot with perfect manners and just enough royal arrogance to make it last, even though she didn't add another thread. Catherine de' Medici was born in 1519 into Florence's Medici family, which was wealthy but also prone to controversy. She had at least a few non-cousins in her lineage, therefore she was technically not born inbred by Habsburg standards. By marrying into the French royal dynasty and creating a small army of genetically similar rulers, Catherine quickly made up for lost dynastic entanglement. Despite not being her genetic cousin, her husband, Henry II of France, was undoubtedly a close political match. Their union was calculated. Money meets military might, Medici ambition meets Bourbon drama, Italy meets France. For her part, Catherine rapidly adjusted. With a questionable accent, no real influence, and an inconvenient third wheel named Diane de Poitiers, her husband's very public mistress, she arrived in France. Undeterred, Catherine collected children, learned court intrigue, and quietly formed connections for 10 years. Exactly. Furthermore, even though Catherine wasn't born a Habsburg, she undoubtedly learned how to parent like one, thus the most of them would eventually marry relatives. Because nothing shouts weak masculinity like taking a splinter to the eye for sport, Catherine became Queen Mother and the most powerful woman in France after Henry died in a jousting accident. Catherine alternately ruled behind her sons, Francis II, Charles IX, and Henry III, who each took turns donning the crown. Although she was a devout Catholic, her political adaptability allowed her to periodically finance Protestant marriages and plan the mass slaughter of Protestants attending those weddings in 16th century France. Massacre on St. Bartholomew's Day. After that one, her reputation suffered. That was extravagant even for a woman who married her daughters into 3 powerful European houses. Almost everything was attributed to Catherine. the odd poisoning rate at official dinners, the religious strife, and the decadence of the court. Despite the continuous conflicts, the disobedient nobility, and the family meals that likely required food tasters and copious amounts of wine, she was also a patron of the arts, a smart strategist, and somehow managed to keep the Valois dynasty limping along. Though politically exhausted, she continued to plot until her death in 1589. Her legacy was a generation of frighteningly alike royals who dominated with a combination of forceful, cousin-hugging, charm, and Catholic guilt. Sleeping meant more than just getting some rest in ancient Greece. It served as a conduit to the divine and was a sacred act. The Asclepia, dream temples devoted to the curing deity Asclepius, were the only places where this was more explicit. These were neither rural shrines nor cozy inns. The ill, the tired, and the hopeful came to these expansive spiritual complexes not only for healing, but also for transformation. In these sanctuaries, you did not simply get into bed to get ready for sleep. Ritual purification came first. Pilgrims were required to bathe in holy springs, sacrifice animals, fast for days, and frequently refrain from having sex or simply thinking specific ideas. Before trying incubation, a spiritual sleep in which healing visions might manifest, the body and spirit were to be cleansed. At last, supplicants would lie down on stone slabs or animal skins inside the abaton, a gloomy, enclosed room. The walls were lit by flickering torches. Priests lit incense and muttered prayers. Here, sleeping was a deliberate journey into an other world. Dreams weren't arbitrary or pointless. They were thought to be direct instructions from Asclepius himself, providing healing advice that was either symbolic or sometimes extremely literal. Interestingly, it considered a positive indication to dream of snakes writhing over one's body. Asclepius revered snakes as symbols of rebirth and divine intervention. In actuality, the temple grounds, particularly the sleeping chambers, were frequently open to non-venomous snakes. Indeed, it was seen as a divine honor for humans to intentionally fall asleep in the presence of snakes. The temple priests, many of whom functioned more as dream analysts than as medical professionals, would assist in interpreting the visions in the morning. They occasionally recommended dietary adjustments or natural therapies. In other cases, the dream itself was thought to have realigned the spirit or soul, and therefore served as the remedy. Sleep was more than just a biological need for ancient people, as the Greek dream temples demonstrate. It was an enchanted journey, a dialogue with the gods. And if you were fortunate, that supernatural whisper at midnight would not only heal your body, but also alter your destiny. Sleep in ancient Egypt meant more than just not waking up. When the soul, or Ba, departed from the body and journeyed through spiritual worlds, it was a kind of little death. The Egyptians created sleep rituals that were a combination of medicine and mysticism, and they were fully integrated into their cosmic worldview in order to protect the dreamer from evil forces and guide that journey. Many Egyptians, particularly those in the priestly or affluent classes, had complex nocturnal rituals before sleeping. The main ingredient was incense. Myrrh and frankincense were not merely exotic scents, they were holy instruments. It was believed that burning these resins would quiet the mind, enlist the help of the gods, and rid the air of demons. By enveloping the sleeper in supernatural protection, the smoke itself represented the ascent of prayers to the skies. Chanting or prayer recitations followed, which were frequently uttered out loud by priests or whispered in private by people. These spells were active spiritual defenses that invoked deities such as Thoth, the deity of wisdom and dreams, or Bez, a squat, lion-faced dwarf god who warded off evil spirits and nightmares. They were more than just calming bedtime mantras. Often pictures of Bez were painted on bedroom walls or carved onto headboards. His hideous features were designed to frighten away anything that could be hiding in the dark. The actual bedroom was set up as a hallowed area, Raised beds were common, constructed of wood or woven reeds, and some even had built-in amulets or emblems of protection. It was thought that special headrests, which appear extremely unpleasant by today's standards, kept the soul in harmony with the stars while you slept. Orientation was important to the Egyptians. Many people oriented their sleeping positions toward the rising sun or constellations that are connected to Osiris and the afterlife, such as Orion. One would go to a temple, particularly one devoted to Imhotep or Serapis, where dream incubation rites, like to those in Greece, were performed if they had unsettling dreams or desired divine insight. Chants, oils, and incense were used here as well to encourage sleep, but always with the hope of getting direction from beyond. Comfort was only one aspect of getting ready for bed for the ancient Egyptians. The purpose of the ceremonial dance was to balance the body, soul, and universe. Sleep was holy, perilous, and full with opportunities. The distinction between destiny and dream was extremely blurry in ancient Babylon. Sleep was more than just a passive activity. It served as a battlefield for ghosts, omens, and divine communications. The Babylonians were serious about their dreams. In fact, they were taken so seriously that whole professions were centered around them. Shailu, or dream priests, were skilled interpreters of the nightly visions that were given to both kings and commoners. Babylonians frequently carried out protective rites before bed to make sure the correct kinds of dreams found them. It was thought that demons or roving spirits, as well as gods like Marduk or Ishtar, could send dreams. People used amulets, protective tablets under their mattresses, and magical symbol tracing around their sleeping quarters as a sort of astral security system to ward off evil spirits. At nightfall, tamarisk, cedarwood, and juniper incense were burned, filling the dwelling with holy smoke. This was more than just air scenting. It was thought to please the gods and cleanse the surroundings. For the Babylonians, sleep was more than just relaxation. The gods favored a tidy entrance, and it served as a conduit for heavenly communication. To promote prophetic dreams, many Babylonians would repeat prayers or incantations at night. Clarity, defense against delusions, and safe travel through the dream world were all requested in these prayers. Dream incubation is the practice of sleeping in a temple or outside under the stars to get advice on a decision, such as whether to go to war, grow a crop, or propose marriage. In order to influence the dreamer's actions by morning, it was hoped that the gods would deliver a dream that was so clear and vivid. When the dreams finally came, they were written down on clay tablets, occasionally with illustrations of what they contained. The Babylonians amassed enormous lists of symbols and their meanings over time, including dream dictionaries. A lion's dream could portend victory in combat. Have a drowning dream? Anticipate treachery. These writings were so important that Greek and Roman dream analysis was eventually influenced by their structure. Dreams were not considered psychological jargon by the Babylonians. They were communications from the divine realm, and if you followed the proper rites and slept in the favor of the gods, you could discern their intentions every night. Sleep was more than just a biological need in early India's Vedic culture. It happened in the cosmos. Sleep is a sacred stage in which the Atman, or soul, returns to the universal spirit, Brahman, before being reborn at dawn, according to the Vedic writings, which were written thousands of years ago. Additionally, going to sleep requires awareness, discipline, and preparation, just like any other sacred ritual. In ancient Indian sleep culture, pranayama, or breath regulation, was one of the most crucial practices. Before going to bed, practitioners were instructed to slow their breathing and quiet their minds in order to synchronize their breathing with the universe's pulse rather than to fall asleep quickly. This was no religious jargon. It was thought to be necessary to facilitate the soul's calm nighttime journey. Disturbed sleep, according to Vedic sages, might result in poor karma, spiritual imbalance, or even mental bewilderment. Rituals were so meticulously observed. Many people sang Sanskrit hymns and nightly mantras to the gods or to ask for protection while they slept. The Gayatri mantra was a common midnight chant that was frequently mumbled while facing the direction of the setting sun. The actual sleeping area was crucial. It was unlucky to have your head pointing north because that was the direction of death. For identical reasons, the south was avoided. Either west, toward repose, or east, toward knowledge, was the chosen direction. In the belief that specific materials might affect the soul's dreams, people utilized natural bedding composed of cotton, animal hides, or kusa grass. Herbs and oils were also used to help get ready for sleep. Pyanga, or warm sesame oil massages, are used before bed, according to ancient Ayurvedic writings. This technique eased muscles, soothed the nervous system, and primed the mind for more restful sleep. To encourage clear, perceptive dreams, herbal infusions produced from ashwagandha, brahmi, or tulsi were either drunk or burned as incense. It was believed that dreams were mirrors of one's inner truth, molded by purity, desire, and karma. Unsettling dreams weren't only chance, they were an indication that something was wrong with the soul. In certain situations, seeking advice from a rishi or spiritual instructor was necessary in order to interpret dreams. Sleep was a homecoming, not an escape, in Vedic India. A reunion with the eternal self encased in divine intention, breath, and mantra. Sleep meant more than just relaxation in ancient China, especially in Taoist traditions. The body rebalanced its internal energy during this energetic reset, and the spirit traveled beyond the material world. Being in balance with the universe was more important for good sleep than simply being exhausted. Taoist thought held that qi, a vital life force, was present throughout the human body and that it moved through meridians. Sleep would suffer if this flow was broken. Thus, before going to bed, nightly rituals were centered on maintaining and controlling qi. This included particular dietary regimens, breathing techniques, postures, and even sleep schedules. You entered a sacred process of balancing the body with heaven and earth, not just going to bed. Pre-sleep techniques like qigong, or slow-focused movements combined with deep breathing, were created by Taoist monks. In order to soothe the shen, or spirit, which was said to reside in the heart, meditation was frequently performed after these. The dreamer may have nightmares, disturbed sleep, or even spiritual attacks if the shen was stimulated by emotions, a bad diet, or even a noisy environment. The settings for sleeping were carefully chosen. Bamboo or wood, which were believed to promote positive energy flow, were used to make beds. The headrests were low and sturdy, allowing qi to flow easily and maintaining proper body alignment. In order to prevent overstimulation, rooms were frequently decorated minimally. Cleanliness was energetic hygiene, not merely a personal choice. It also affected what position one slept in. For better digestion and dream clarity, it was thought that lying on one's right side was ideal. Like what would eventually become feng shui, feet and head direction were in line with geomantic principles. Dreams were regarded as the ethereal soul's hun excursions. The hun passed through the spirit world while sleeping, while the po, the corporeal soul, stayed with the body. People thought their hun had been harmed or lost if they woke up feeling scared or exhausted. In order to keep spirits safe, protective talismans or charms made of cinnabar were occasionally placed beneath pillows. Dreams were not considered just psychological by Taoists. They served as spiritual maps of karma and energy and as diagnostic instruments. Proper sleep was a kind of internal alchemy, a way to cultivate immortality one night at a time. Many Native American tribes considered sleep and dreams as portals to spiritual guidance, ancestral wisdom, and personal transformation, even before they came into contact with Europeans. Dreams were more than just individual experiences for the Lakota, Navajo, Hopi, and other tribes. These were cosmic and collective signals that may influence an individual's fate or even the tribe's. Tribes had different night rituals, but they all believed that dreams allowed one to interact with the spirit world, frequently with the help of ancestors, deities, or animal guides. People practiced ceremonial purification in order to get ready for this connection. The sweat lodge, a ceremonial steam bath meant to purify the body and soul, was one popular technique. Before going to bed, participants would recite songs and prayers to ask for wisdom and clarity while sitting in a dome-shaped building filled with steam from water poured over heated stones. Tribes practiced the vision quest, a sacred process that involved fasting, seclusion, and frequently spending several nights in nature for people looking for deeper visions, particularly young men coming of age. Without food, water, or companionship, the initiate would locate a secluded area, build a tiny area or circle, and spend the night there under the stars. The objective was to dream, not just to survive. Tribal elders or shamans would then interpret the dream, which frequently determined the seeker's future function as a warrior, healer, storyteller, or leader. Many indigenous groups used dream catchers, a now famous emblem that was first used by the Ojibwe in their daily lives. To filter dreams, these elaborate webs of sinew and beads were strung above the bed. Only pleasant dreams were allowed to flow through, while bad ones were held in place until they were dissolved by the morning sun. Dream catchers served as a protective and symbolic tool for kids, guiding them through a world where dreams might bless, warn, or instruct. Elders were frequently regarded as dream keepers, those who understood symbols and could interpret the meanings concealed in dreams. A hawk could represent insight or an impending challenge, while a bear could represent power. Seldom were dreams disregarded. They were talked about around bonfires, incorporated into legends, and occasionally even utilized to inform tribal choices. Sleep was a sacred conversation with the invisible in indigenous American beliefs. It was an awakening rather than an escape. Sleep and the holy were closely related in ancient Mesopotamia, the birthplace of civilization. Every dream, according to the Sumerians, Akkadians, and later Babylonians, was a message, and the night itself was governed by strong gods who dictated what the dreamer would see. Sleep was an active condition of spiritual communication rather than a respite from reality, and getting ready for it was nearly as crucial as the actual dream. The gods of the night and dreams were part of the extensive pantheon of the Mesopotamians. Nanshu, the goddess of dreams, prophecy, and social justice, was foremost among them. Those who sought answers through visions were welcomed in her temples, particularly during holy festivals, when it was thought that the veil between the worlds was thinner. In the temple precincts, worshippers would sleep in the hopes of obtaining direction through a process they referred to as dream incubation. Before going to bed, folks performed ritual purification to promote meaningful dreams. This could entail bathing in holy rivers like the Tigris or Euphrates, applying scented oils to the body, and uttering invocations to the gods of magic and knowledge, Nanshi or Ea. These rituals were frequently recommended by priests as spiritual remedies for dreamers who needed assistance with political issues, personal troubles, or disease. Sleeping quarters within houses were simple, yet spiritually strengthened. Tiny clay tablets with protective charms or inscriptions could be hung next to the bed or placed beneath pillows. To fend off night demons like Lamashtu, a terrifying female ghost rumored to attack women and children at night, these included apotropaic rituals. Particularly well liked were amulets of the demon slayer, Pazuzu, placed to protect sleeping. The profession of dream interpretation was highly esteemed. Based on centuries of studied symbolism, dream readers, also known as Baru, created extensive manuals and early dream dictionaries. The content, animals, weather, food, celestial happenings, and even the feelings experienced throughout the dream were all categorized by these tablets. A lion could foretell favor with the king. A house that collapses could be a sign of imminent catastrophe. Early practitioners of organized oniromancy or dream divination were the Mesopotamians. In ancient Mesopotamia, sleeping was never a passive activity. It was a risk, a revelation, and a ritual. You had better have your prayers, oil, and defensive charms ready, since entering the world of dreams meant entering the realm of the gods. From the foggy highlands of Scotland to the oak groves of Gaul, the ancient Celtic peoples believed that dreams were windows to the other world, a magical realm that was home to ancestors, spirits, fae, and gods. Oral traditions and later Roman accounts show that sleep rites, particularly among the Druids, were replete in symbolism, mystery, and sacred intent, despite the Celts leaving behind fewer written documents than some other ancient nations. Celtic intellectuals and spiritual leaders known as the Druids held that the soul may enter the other world while one slept, a realm of greater truth rather than the hereafter. Dreams were one of the few links that connected this world to the human world, which existed in parallel. The body and soul have to be primed in order to fully access it. Herbal purification was frequently the first step in night rites. In order to improve the lucidity of dreams, mugwort, vervain, and yarrow, plants that are still connected to dreams and visions today, were burned or placed beneath pillows. It was thought that the smoke from these herbs thinned the curtain between worlds. Before going to bed, some even boiled them into teas or potions and drank them while whispering prayers to ancestor spirits or the fair folk. In order to achieve geomantic alignment, sleep areas were specifically selected. It was thought that some hills, stone circles, or holy groves were areas of energetic confluence, where the spirits would be more approachable or dreams might be more powerful. People would sleep in these places during several holidays, including Samhain, the Celtic New Year and ancestor celebration, in order to get messages from gods like the Dagda or Brigid, or visions from their deceased loved ones. After rigorous fasting and chanting, certain warriors and leaders are said to have slept by themselves in caves or forests in search of prophetic dreams prior to battle. These dreams were taken very seriously, since they were thought to portend either success or failure. The ancient Celtic poets and seers were given dream symbols, like as animals, colors, or landscapes, and they interpreted them in poem. A dream of drowning in a woodland could indicate betrayal, while a white stag could symbolize metamorphosis. Celtic mythology was interwoven with dreams which influenced both individual fates and collective narratives. The night was not quiet in the Celtic world. For those who were brave or pure enough to listen, it throbbed with whispers from beyond and took them into their dreams. In ancient Japan, a spiritual system called Onmyodo, or the path of yin and yang, was used to delicately negotiate the boundaries between magic, sleep, and the invisible. Onmyodo, which had its roots in a synthesis of Buddhist, Shinto, and Taoist cosmology, provided both commoners and aristocrats with means to preserve the soul while they slept and to use the lessons contained in dreams. Onmyodo was based on the idea that the yin forces, which are dark, concealed, and frequently chaotic, were at their strongest during the night. A person who slept was more susceptible to being influenced by negative kimon or directional energy, as well as to being possessed by evil spirits known as yokai or yurei. Practitioners employed a range of pre-sleep rituals that combined purification and spiritual defense to counteract this. A feuda, which are paper talismans engraved with sacred spells, were placed on bedroom walls or close to sleeping mats as part of one such rite. An onmyoji, an expert with training in astrology, divination, and exorcism, frequently blessed these charms. The talismans might channel good fortune, ward off evil spirits, or seal bad dreams. It was also customary to burn incense made from aloe or sandalwood before bed. It was thought that the fragrance would appease guardian spirits and provide a barrier of purification. Ritual chanting or silent recitation of Buddhist sutras may be practiced in aristocratic homes to promote restful sleep and soothe the psyche. Instead of sleeping facing north, which was thought to be the direction of death, those who were very sensitive to the spirit world would sleep facing auspicious directions. Since children were particularly susceptible, they were frequently shielded by engraved amulets or had special dolls placed close by to either absorb or repel bad energy. It was believed that these dolls, known as hitogata, carried the weight of the sleeper's spiritual weaknesses. Dreams themselves were often shared with diviners and monks or documented in private notebooks. Animals, blood, or fire in a dream could represent a divine warning, betrayal, or an approaching sickness. On the other hand, visions of lotus blossoms soaring or waterfalls may portend blessings or spiritual development. Dreams were messages, but only if you were able to interpret them and if you made it through the night without getting hurt. Sleep was a serious matter to the ancient Japanese. Every night, beneath the silent watch of the stars and spirits, it was a spiritual ordeal, a strategy, and a ritual. Heracleion, also called Thonis by the Egyptians, existed long before Alexandria took over the Egyptian coastline. As the main port of entry into Egypt for centuries, it was a bustling hub of trade, religion, and diplomacy, where Greek traders, Egyptian priests, and foreign diplomats interacted in a dynamic mingling of cultures. Heracleion, however, had ostensibly vanished from history by the time late medieval historians were penning their chronicles. Its location had been lost, and its name had only been maintained in fading manuscripts and vague stories. Many others wrote it off as a myth, a kind of Atlantis in Egypt. Nevertheless, it was genuine. Once, Heracleion spanned the Nile Delta, its canals meandering past enormous marketplaces and stone temples. Overlooking the harbours were imposing statues of gods such as Horus and Amun-Gereb. In order to pay taxes and obtain authorization to enter inland Egypt, ships from Greece, Phoenicia, and other countries docked there. It had one of the most significant customs houses in antiquity. In order to obtain legitimacy from the gods before, to the start of their reigns, pharaohs would conduct ceremonial procedures in this holy capital. So how could such a metropolis simply disappear? The area was hit by a string of natural calamities sometime between the 2nd and 8th centuries CE. Entire parts of Heracleion collapsed into the Mediterranean Sea as a result of earthquakes, sea level rise, and a sudden phenomena known as liquefaction, in which the soil beneath the city almost turned to jelly. The ruins were gradually covered by silt and sand, and the currents of the estuary of the Nile wiped out little was left visible. The map of Heracleion was literally erased. The city was concealed beneath the seas for more than 1,000 years, and Herodotus and a few Greek intellectuals were the only ones who knew of it in passing. Nobody really thought you could find it. Not until the startling find made off the shore of Aboukir Bay by French underwater archaeologist Frank Goddio in 2000. A metropolis that had been preserved like a time capsule was quietly waiting beneath 30 feet of water on the silt-rich seabed. Heracleion had not been lost forever, but had simply been sleeping beneath the sea, as evidenced by the discovery of enormous statues, shipwrecks, gold coins, and inscriptions on steles. Heracleion was much more than a coastal outpost at its height. As the first port of call for foreign traders and ambassadors before continuing on into the interior of the Nile, it served as the hub of Egypt's international trade. The city served as a cultural filter and a customs checkpoint due to its advantageous location close to the canopic outlet of the Nile. Heracleion was the initial port of entry for anything arriving in Egypt via sea. Arriving from the Aegean and the Levant were ships loaded with luxury textiles, wine, incense, silver, cedarwood, and olive oil. Egypt supplied papyrus, grain, linen, glassware, gold, and its hallmark exports in exchange. These transactions were first recorded, taxed, and blessed in Heracleion, frequently in front of pious sculptures and priesthood officials. When the Greeks arrived, they were both captivated and frequently scared by what they witnessed. The massive temples were flanked by statues that were more than 5 meters tall and were sculpted from solid pieces of stone. One temple in particular caught our attention. It was a huge sanctuary devoted to Amun-Gerab, a hybrid of the local deity and the Egyptian god Amun. In order to obtain the heavenly favor of ruling, pharaohs would travel here and take part in ceremonial coronations that strengthened their authority in the eyes of both mankind and gods. However, Heracleion was more than just a place of worship and commerce. Egyptians, Greeks, Phoenicians, Libyans, and others lived, worked, and interacted in this multicultural city. Greek and Egyptian inscriptions, jewelry, amulets, and even tax records etched on tablets are among the artifacts found on the seafloor. These discoveries point to a city that flourished on connection rather than isolation, one that was alive and well through its contacts with the larger Mediterranean community. Over 70 ancient shipwrecks have been discovered by Frank Godio's underwater investigations. Many of these were utilized to transport cargo to and from Heracleion's crowded docks. Coins, ceramics, and anchors attest to the wide-ranging and controlled nature of trade. Incense for the gods, gold for the state, and taxes collected from arriving cargo were all meticulously documented by temples. To put it succinctly, Heracleion was Egypt's maritime center, a meeting point of global trade and divine authority. As the protector of the Nile, it greeted the world and kept its secrets safe until the sea took them back. The enormous temples that still lie beneath the water were the source of one of the most startling discoveries regarding Heracleion, not coins or ships. These weren't little shrines hidden away. Dedicated to the gods who governed the Nile and the universe, they were expansive, colossal constructions composed of granite and limestone. The Temple of Amun-Gerab, a vast religious edifice that probably had both political and spiritual purposes, was the city's crown gem. Pharaohs obtained divine approval here and carried out rites to validate their authority. Heracleion was more than a customs office. Egyptian monarchs spiritually bound themselves to the divine order, or Mayat, in this site of ceremonial coronation. What's truly amazing, though, is how much of it has survived. Frank Godio and his colleagues found enormous statues, many of which were still upright when they swam beneath the silt-choked waters of Abukir Bay. Some, such as a huge figure of the god Hapi, who represents abundance and the rushing Nile, were more than 5 meters tall. Others included remarkably accurate sculptures of pharaohs and queens. Which is more startling? Despite spending more than a millennium underwater, several were discovered almost undamaged. Then came the stelae, which were enormous slabs of stone with hieroglyphic writing on them. The decree of Nectar Nebo Fi, an official declaration etched into granite that enumerated religious regulations and temple privileges, was one particularly significant discovery. Its ability to survive underwater is a marvel in and of itself, and it provided concrete evidence that Heracleion was more than just a myth, but a significant religious center supported by the government. In addition to being places of worship, Heracleion's temples served as stores of riches and wisdom. Offerings flooded in from all across the Mediterranean: incense burners, ceremonial knives, alabaster jars, and gold. Temple halls were lined with statues of Osiris, Isis, and Horus, and religious processions were conducted in ceremonial boats, some of which were discovered submerged but remarkably intact. It is evident what these temples show. Heracleion was more than just a commercial port. It was a spiritual capital. These rites, which are now hauntingly silent but preserved in stone beneath the seas, determined the fate of rulers, blessed the economy, and connected the world of the gods with the world of the living. Heracleion was forgotten by maps, buried behind sedimentary layers and written off as myth by many for more than a millennium. However, the sea's solitude was ultimately broken in 2000. With support from the European Institute for Underwater Archaeology, French underwater archaeologist Frank Godiot, i.e. Wesson, discovered the submerged remnants of a metropolis that defied time, a finding that would astound the world. Godiot had been researching old manuscripts and searching the murky waters of Abu Qir Bay, which is located off the coast of Alexandria, Egypt, for years. There have long been suspicions that the area held secrets. The writings of Strabo, Herodotus, and Egyptian archives all contained hints about a once great city that was engulfed by the Mediterranean. However, no one had discovered tangible evidence prior to Godiot's mission. His crew searched the sea floor using sophisticated sonar and magnetometry, finding anomalies concealed behind meters of silt. There was more to what surfaced than a collection of artifacts. The city was completely underwater. In the anaerobic depths, entire neighborhoods, canals, temples, statues, and shipwrecks were preserved, shielded from erosion by mud and river sediment layers. Massive statues, including 2 commanding 5-meter statues of a Ptolemaic king and queen that are thought to depict a governing couple that previously ruled Heracleion, were among the first items found. A huge stele bearing Greek and Egyptian inscriptions soon followed, establishing the city's legitimacy. A historian's dream, the bilingual inscriptions provided concrete evidence that Thonis and Heracleion were, in fact, the same city, albeit the Greeks and Egyptians had different names for it. Godiot's crew discovered thousands of coins, weights, religious artifacts, ceremonial utensils, and more than 70 ancient shipwrecks over the course of the following several years. Not only was the volume remarkable, but the preservation condition outstanding as well. These artifacts were preserved in time beneath the silt, unaffected by weather or looters, in contrast to ruins discovered on land. The rediscovery of Heracleion by Frank Godiot was more than just a feat, it was a resurrection. Now, piece by piece, a metropolis supposed to be a myth was resurfacing, providing a breathtaking window into a civilization that had been assumed to be lost forever. The fact that only a small portion of the city has been excavated is possibly the most thrilling of all. Awaiting the next dive, Heracleion continues to slumber. Heracleion rose magnificently, yet it fell silently, slowly, and destructively. In a slow, almost spectral collapse, Heracleion disappeared beneath the water, unlike towns destroyed by fire or conflict. Not a single day of doom was present. Rather, the city was destroyed by a succession of natural catastrophes that occurred over millennia. These were the kind of occurrences that were too subtle to garner media attention, but had the capacity to wipe out an entire civilization. Tectonic action was the initial culprit. The foundations of Heracleion were especially fragile because the Nile Delta is located in an area that experiences earthquake activity. Because the city was constructed on silt and clay rather than solid bedrock, it's possible that the soft, wet ground beneath it was undermined by small but frequent earthquakes. Heracleion was cursed by liquefaction, a geological occurrence in addition to the tremors. Liquefaction occurs when the ground loses its capacity to sustain weight due to saturation with water. Consider a layer of damp sand that abruptly transforms into quicksand. That's what took place under Heracleion. Whole areas of the city started to sink as the earth actually melted due to earthquakes shaking the delta and rising sea levels pushing salt water farther inland. Ships, temples, and buildings all dragged down into the muck. Temples started to tilt and disappear beneath the surface, quays crumbled, canals overflowed, and the city gradually broke apart. As the busy port gradually deteriorated, traffic had to move westward toward Alexandria, which gained significance. At the end of the 2nd century BCE, Heracleion was becoming less significant. It had virtually vanished beneath the Mediterranean seas by the 8th century CE. The fact that nobody was able to halt it makes it terrifying how little anyone did. Nature was sluggish but unrelenting. Heracleian citizens did not panic and run away. They rebuilt, prayed, and adjusted. Then one day it just disappeared. Its buried ruins were still traversed by boats. Where stone idols previously stood, fishermen threw their nets. Even the city's name became legendary as its memory dwindled. The sinking of Heracleion serves as a sobering reminder today. The calm, steady hand of nature, not adversaries, has the power to overthrow even the most powerful cities. Despite Heracleion's disappearance under the sea, items found in its remains provide a clear image of what life would have been like in this once thriving Egyptian port. Heracleion was a thriving city with marketplaces, temples, courtyards, and shipyards. It was not just a ceremonial or political hub. It was a place where people worshipped, exchanged goods, disputed, and imagined. Underwater investigations have partially mapped the city's plan, revealing a system of canals that connected quays and stone buildings. Like carts in other towns, boats carried people and merchandise across the streets. Despite being more than a millennium older than Venice, Heracleion was frequently referred to as the Venice of Egypt. The architecture combined Hellenistic elements introduced by Greek colonists with classic Egyptian forms, pylons, obelisks, and temple courtyards. A wide variety of people, including Egyptians, Greeks, Phoenicians, Libyans, and other nautical traders, dwelt here. Greek amphorae, Egyptian scarabs, and gold coins bearing the faces of several monarchs are among the objects that have been unearthed. Many languages were spoken, many gods were worshipped, and many traditions coexisted frequently in the same home as a result of this cultural melting pot. Religion played a major role in daily life. Like breakfast, morning sacrifices were made to the gods Amun, Isis, and Osiris. Temples employed priests, scribes, and artists and served as economic hubs in addition to being places of worship. They managed the law, kept track of taxes, and stored money. Religious life and trade were inextricably connected, as evidenced by one stele found at the site that discloses intricate temple procedures, including the taxing of imported products. Both land and sea provided food. Because of the brackish waters of the Nile Delta, there were plenty of fish and shellfish, and inland farms provided beer, figs, and cereals. There would have been bustling, vibrant markets close to the quays, brimming with textiles, spices, and tales from far places. There was entertainment, of course. Inscriptions and statues allude to the existence of dancing, music, and festivals, particularly those dedicated to Osiris, which featured theatrical productions and ceremonial boat processions. Heracleion was living, not merely functional. Heracleion was ultimately a home, not merely a port or a sacred location. Without realizing that their world would one day become a tale buried in water, its inhabitants led normal lives under the shadow of enormous gods. Just a short sail down the coast, Alexandria, founded by Alexander the Great in 331 BCE, was growing while Heracleion's fortunes started to wane. Alexandria became the gem of the Mediterranean and the new center of Egypt's intellectual and maritime life, essentially replacing Heracleion in many ways. However, the two cities' connection went beyond simple rivalry. Rather, it was a component of a broader shift in Egypt's political and cultural identity. Egypt was still governed by indigenous dynasties when Heracleion rose to prominence, and the city's significance stemmed from both its advantageous location, close to the entrance to the Nile Delta, and its traditional Egyptian religious beliefs. Taxes were collected, foreign ships were examined, and kingship was validated by divine rights in Heracleion. However, the Ptolemies, the Greek kings who succeeded Alexander, drastically changed their priorities to Greek administration, urban planning, and customs. Built to impress and consolidate authority, Alexandria boasts a vast library, a magnificent lighthouse, and expansive waterways. The Ptolemies chose a new Hellenistic capital over Heracleion and used it as a conduit for trade. By importing Greek architecture, philosophy, and administration, they transformed Alexandria into a center of politics, art, and science, in addition to trade. However, the two cities lived side by side for a while. Temples continued to function, and religious ceremonies continued in Heracleion. But the equilibrium was changing. The aristocratic classes, worldwide attention, and administrative authority all relocated to Alexandria. Heracleion gradually faded into obscurity, no longer necessary, but yet revered and holy. Then came the environmental hits, ground liquefaction, sea level rise, and Heracleion's final submersion. Alexandria arose unharmed, its coastal position more secure and better protected, while the city vanished beneath the seas. It took on the traffic and legacy that Heracleion had previously experienced. Both cities' remains today provide contradictory accounts of the same events. Silence envelops the stones of one buried beneath the sea. Despite the loss of much of its ancient grandeur, the other still hums with life. But Alexandria wouldn't exist without Heracleion. The old city served as both the entryway and the cornerstone of Egypt's future. The common possessions and holy items that characterized life in a big city were also carried by Heracleion as it sank beneath the sea, in addition to temples and statues. Furthermore, many of these artifacts have been preserved in remarkable condition because of the oxygen-poor, silt-rich waters of Abukir Bay. This has enabled contemporary archaeologists to put together not only the appearance of the city, but also the ways in which its inhabitants lived, worked, worshipped, and navigated. The enormous statues, some of which are more than 5 meters tall, are among the most amazing finds. These depict Egyptian gods such as Isis and Hapi, Ptolemaic kings, and even colossal sphinxes. Many were discovered laying where they fell, surrounded by temple wreckage, as though the moment of collapse had been preserved in mud, despite the fact that time had toppled them. Their inscriptions, stance, and facial expressions are still discernible, demonstrating the city's artisans' artistic ability. However, the momentous is not the only thing that has survived. Gold coins, lead weights, jewelry, ceremonial implements, thousands of smaller artifacts, and pieces of pottery have all been found by divers. A ritual jar with elaborate inscriptions and religious imagery that was probably used in temple ceremonies was one especially intriguing discovery. Other items include writing instruments, oil lamps, and personal ornaments, the types of items one could have placed on a home altar or carried in a satchel. There is no denying Heracleion's marine heritage. It was a port as well. There are more than 70 known shipwrecks, several of which have been preserved with their cargo still inside. Researchers now have a better understanding of how ancient Egyptians and their foreign guests handled trade thanks to wooden hulls, anchors, and nautical implements. Certain ships even seem to have sunk while docked, indicating that they perished during the same earthquakes that destroyed the city. The bilingual and stele inscriptions, which are inscribed in both Greek and ancient Egyptian, are arguably the most enigmatic. These manuscripts provide first-hand historical testimony and function as legal papers, religious decrees, and temple inventories. A historical enigma that had baffled researchers for years was resolved when one stele verified the city's dual identification as both Thonis and Heracleion. Essentially, the water turned into Heracleion's unintentional museum, a site of both preservation and disaster. Inscribed in stone, bronze, and silence, the artifacts unearthed from the depths are more than merely relics. They are live whispers from a vanished world. Despite being submerged, Heracleion's history is far from over. The finding of the city has really led to a renewed interest in the interaction between ancient Egypt and the sea, other cultures, and the divine. Once written off as a myth, a name that Herodotus murmured, and that historians partially believed, it now serves as a potent reminder that there are still mysteries in history that are just waiting to be unearthed. Heracleion, in many respects, contradicts the conventional view of Egypt as a desert society confined by the Nile. This city was open to the world, cosmopolitan and maritime. Its culture was neither stagnant nor exclusive. It welcomed outside influences while maintaining a fundamentally Egyptian essence. The fact that bilingual inscriptions and Greco-Egyptian religious fusion exist at all demonstrates how flexible, dynamic, and adaptive this culture was. Heracleion provides archaeologists and historians with a wealth of background in addition to tangible artifacts. It bridges the knowledge gaps regarding the late dynasty and early Hellenistic eras in Egypt. It demonstrates what a live port city looked like, how temples served as both places of worship and administrative hubs, and how a natural disaster may gradually destroy an empire's entrance. However, the city's legacy is profoundly human and goes beyond academics. Mothers praying to Isis for their children's safety, merchants tallying goods, priests reciting incantations in temple courtyards, sailors docking in strange harbors under the watchful eyes of stone gods. All of these stories are told by the statues, coinage, and wrecked ships. All of that underwater life, which had been mute for a millennium, is suddenly speaking once more. The future of archaeology itself has also been altered by the discovery of Heracleion. It is evidence that underwater cities are real. Modern scientists are increasingly reconsidering what might be beneath other coasts, Carthage, ancient Alexandria, and perhaps portions of India and Southeast Asia, due to rising sea levels and changing climates. Heracleion has evolved into a model for discovering the past in the most unlikely locations. Even though its treasures are on exhibit in museums today, and its history is chronicled in books and documentaries, the city still lies beneath the seas, enormous, unexplored, and waiting. Even though Heracleion is no longer lost, it is still a mystery and a ghost city that exists between realms, echoing through time from a period when gods, trade, and empires were all gone. Ancient people were aware of an unpleasant reality long before fluoride toothpaste and modern dentistry. They sought to treat their toothaches, even though they were awful, rather than merely enduring them. Early humans were significantly more imaginative in their use of medicine than we sometimes think, as evidenced by the fact that some of the earliest evidence of dental care dates back almost 9,000 years. Human remains from approximately 7,000 BCE were discovered by archaeologists in the Mehrgarh region of modern-day Pakistan. A number of skulls with teeth drilled using flint tools were discovered, shocking the scientific world. These were exact, deliberate holes that were meticulously punched into teeth. They were neither unintentional markings nor indications of trauma. Since the teeth belonged to adults, the drilling procedure did not harm them, and it most likely was, if that sounds unpleasant. Only grit, sharp stones, and a readiness to put up with pain in the name of relief are there. There is no indication of an anesthetic. These drills were probably driven by bowstrings, which allowed the flint bit to grind into enamel by rotating back and forth, a method akin to kindling a fire. It predates Egyptian civilization by thousands of years, making it the oldest known form of dentistry. What made them do it? According to theories, it may have been done for ceremonial purposes, to remove decomposing material, or to relieve pressure from abscesses. In certain instances, the teeth displayed evidence of bitumen or glue, which may have been applied as a very rudimentary filling to later cover the cavity. This was not a unique instance. Teeth were filed, removed, and even dyed in some primitive societies. Tooth alteration, not usually for medical reasons, but as a form of social identification or spiritual protection, was widespread among various African and Indonesian communities. But the fact is still there. People knew how important teeth were, and they didn't hesitate to do things themselves when decay started. Dental issues were more than just bothersome. Even in these early times, they might be lethal. Drilling out the rot, however crude the approach, may have saved lives in a world without antibiotics, because an untreated abscess could cause infection, fever, and even death. Therefore, primitive humans were not ignorant, even though they lacked Novocaine and porcelain crowns. They set the groundwork for everything that followed by overcoming oral discomfort with stone instruments, unadulterated bravery, and startling accuracy. Egypt frequently takes center stage when discussing ancient medicine, and dentistry was no exception. The Egyptians recognized dental issues and developed a whole branch of medicine to treat them. In actuality, Hesira, an Egyptian who lived during the time of Pharaoh Djoser in 2600 BCE, was the first dentist in history. The fact that his tomb is titled Chief of Dentists and Physicians indicates that dentistry was already regarded as a respectable occupation in the Old Kingdom. But don't imagine a serene clinic with smiling patients and metal tools. Egyptian dentistry was a rigorous fusion of magical incantations and practical methods. Treatments for gum disease, infections, and toothaches can be found in the well-known Ebers Papyrus, a medical text that dates back 3,500 years. Honey and chewed herbs, both of which have antibacterial qualities, were used in some therapies. Others, however, used rituals to ward off evil spirits and placed a dead mouse on the tooth that hurt, not exactly approved by the ADA. The idea of dental hygiene was also grasped by the Egyptians. They chewed on fragrant sticks to freshen their breath, used twig toothbrushes, and even manufactured crude toothpaste out of myrrh, pumice, crushed eggshells, and bovine hooves. It was harsh, gritty, and not very minty, but it did the trick. Evidence of dental surgery attempts can be found in mummies that have been excavated. Some skulls have abscesses that seem to have been drained, while others have drilled molars resembling those seen in prehistoric Pakistan. Additionally, there are indications of rudimentary splints that were used to secure loose teeth. However, the majority of Egyptians probably experienced dental issues without receiving significant treatment. Their diet of stone-ground bread injected a lot of grit and sand into their mouths, causing fractures and premature tooth wear. Curiously, gold wires and metal bands, possibly the first examples of dental bridges or stabilizing devices, have been discovered by archaeologists in a few skulls. They prove one thing regardless of whether they were added after death or used throughout life. Egyptians were coming up with inventive ways to maintain the mouth's structure. Ancient Egyptian dentistry was essentially a combination of science and religion. Invoking gods such as Sekhmet and Thoth for assistance, they experimented with medical instruments, recognized infection, and practiced hygiene. Even though they lacked an anesthetic, their ambition was what made all the difference. The Etruscans of ancient Italy invented something even more glitzy, dental prosthesis, while the Egyptians were combining myrrh and bovine hooves to make abrasive toothpaste. These extremely talented craftspeople were creating what could be regarded as the first dental bridges, elegant, practical fixes for lost teeth that would have an impact on dentistry for centuries, long before the Romans ruled the Mediterranean. Skulls with gold bands and wire ligatures keeping new teeth in place have been found in Etruscan burial sites dating back to approximately 700 BCE. These were status symbols as well as practical solutions. The replacement teeth were often not artificial at all. Rather, they were actual human or animal teeth, occasionally from oxen, that were skillfully positioned next to the natural teeth using loops of fine gold. It was sensitive, accurate, and sometimes painful. However, it was successful. The Etruscans were renowned for their proficiency in metallurgy, which also applied to dentistry. Their bridges were made of gold bands that were both robust enough to hold teeth firmly in place and soft enough to work with. These were not easy solutions for the average person. Instead, they were specialized dental procedures for the affluent, perhaps carried out by talented metalworkers or doctors connected to aristocratic or religious families. The beauty of their dental solutions is what's amazing. In addition to being practical, these bridges were designed to maintain beauty and restore facial symmetry. Long before modern cosmetic dentistry, the Etruscans recognized that missing teeth changed not just how a person chewed, but also how their face looked overall. This was very important in a society where status and looks were closely linked. The existence of dental appliances indicates that oral health was actively addressed, not just for medical purposes, even if there is no concrete proof that they carried out extractions or surgeries. Etruscan dental work depicts a people who were extremely committed in appearance, legacy, and dignity, even in death, much like their ornate tombs and beautiful jewelry. Given how closely dental care was linked to identification, some of these dental bridges stayed in place after burial, indicating that they were worn during life and carried into the afterlife. A shining smile from a civilization ahead of its time, the Etruscans' gold-bound bridges were a symbol of beauty and creativity in a world without implants or dentures. By the time the Roman Empire gained power, dentistry had changed to include a combination of dubious cosmetics, experimental surgery, and utilitarian remedies. The Etruscans and Greeks did not only leave the Romans with medical expertise, they added their own distinctively Roman flair, formalized it, and enlarged it. Think of it as traditional dental care with a dash of vinegar rinse and military efficiency. In his medical encyclopedia de Medicina, Aulus Cornelius Celsus, one of the most well-known Roman medical authors, detailed dental operations. He mentioned methods for tooth extraction, toothache treatment, and even mouthwash prepared from charcoal, broken bones, and oyster shells. Urine, which seems disgusting in today's world, was used in several recipes as a natural supply of ammonia, a powerful cleaning agent. Urine was indeed used as mouthwash by the Romans. It was valued for its teeth-whitening properties and was imported in bottles from places like Portugal and Gaul. It's possible that elite Romans who wanted to have brilliant grins endured regular gargles of fermented ammonia, followed by a vinegar or wine rinse to freshen their breath. It appears that vanity can triumph over repulsion. In addition, Roman doctors performed mouth surgery and extractions using dental elevators, forceps, and scalpels. Surgical kits and metal equipment have been discovered at excavation sites, demonstrating that even though dentistry is painful, it was prevalent. Because dental health was seen as essential to combat readiness, soldiers in particular received treatment for broken or abscessed teeth. However, early prosthetics based on Etruscan designs were available to the wealthy. These comprised bone or ivory replacement teeth and bridges fastened with gold wire. Romans viewed teeth as prestige symbols, just like their forebears. Particularly in public settings like the Forum or the Baths, a full white smile was seen as a sign of beauty, strength, and good breeding. Even the philosopher Pliny the Elder added his thoughts, suggesting treatments such as chewing mint to treat foul breath or applying burning mouse ash to toothaches. Despite their eccentricity, his works demonstrate how integral dental health was to Roman daily life. Ultimately, Roman dentistry was both sophisticated and cruel. Hurt, of course. Successful? Sometimes. However, maintaining one's teeth was a Roman obligation in an empire that was fixated on beauty, sanitation, and control, regardless of how odd the methods. The Maya of Mesoamerica were transforming dentistry into a literal art form, while the ancient Mediterranean civilizations were cleaning their teeth with crushed bones and gold wire. Dental alteration served purposes beyond health for the Maya. It has to do with spiritual symbolism, identity, and position. They did more than simply mend teeth. Without the use of contemporary anesthesia, they embellished, sculpted, and set precious stones into them. Skulls with elaborate dental work from more than 1,000 years ago have been discovered through archaeological excavations at locations in modern-day Mexico, Guatemala, and Honduras. Inlays of jade, turquoise, hematite, or obsidian were placed into the front teeth of many Mayan aristocrats while they were still living, rather than after they passed away. Using crude rotary tools topped with obsidian or other sharp stones, the inlays were meticulously placed into tiny, precisely drilled holes in the enamel. To hold the stones in place, they are thought to have applied lubricants and adhesives like water, quartz powder, or even plant resins. These adjustments are quite accurate. Despite not framing it in medical terms, researchers think the Maya possessed a profound understanding of dental anatomy because of how symmetrical and clean the drilled holes are. Surprisingly, there is also little indication of infection or nerve damage, indicating that these operations were not only common, but also successfully performed. Why, though, did they do it? Cultural meaning holds the key to the solution. The mouth was a potent symbol for the Maya, the hallowed site of the emergence of speech and breath. In order to honor the gods, demonstrate one's privileged rank, or harmonize with cosmic forces, people would alter their teeth. For instance, jade was linked to fertility, life, and heavenly favor. A king with jade-inlaid teeth was representing sacred power, not merely flaunting their position. Similar to vampire fangs or symbolic symbols, the Maya also used tooth filing, molding canines and incisors into points. In certain instances, the motifs resembled animal shapes, probably suggesting transformation or spiritual protection. Additionally, there is evidence that some dental procedures, such as filling cavities or drilling abscesses, were utilitarian fixes, even though some were ceremonial. Therefore, centuries before European dentistry caught up, the Maya were not only practicing ritual art, but also addressing actual dental issues. Every glistening smile was infused with a worldview that the Maya believed was a combination of medicine, magic, and beauty. Dentistry was not a distinct science in ancient China. It was intricately woven into the larger theory of TCM, or traditional Chinese medicine. Chinese doctors felt that oral health was a reflection of overall body health rather than treating the mouth as a distinct entity. A toothache was more than just a dental problem. It was an indication of an internal organ imbalance, especially in the kidneys and stomach. Additionally, the Chinese established a complex system of preventative and medicinal dentistry that lasted for generations, despite not using drills or bridges like other cultures. Dental problems were mentioned as early as 3000 BCE in writings found in books like the Huangdi Neijing, the inner canon of the Yellow Emperor. The meridians, or energy pathways that link the teeth to particular organs, were charted by ancient practitioners. For instance, lower molar pain may indicate stomach or bladder problems. Chinese medicine used herbal remedies, acupuncture, and diet to restore balance rather than treat the ailment. Daily dental hygiene was emphasized in order to maintain healthy teeth. Like toothbrushes, people used the aromatic twigs of aromatic trees like willow and miswak to clean their teeth. To remove accumulation, they also employed crushed herbs, saltwater rinses, and even powdered bone. Cloves, mint, rhubarb root, cinnamon, and ginseng were frequently used in tooth powders with the goals of strengthening gums, lowering inflammation, and improving breath. Acupuncture was used to treat toothaches, focusing on points on the jaw, neck, and even hands to reduce pain and promote healing. In order to draw out illness or relieve swelling, poultices, mixtures of pulverized herbs placed directly to the gum or cheek, were frequently used in conjunction with this non-invasive technique. Interestingly, tooth regeneration methods utilizing mineral pastes or spiritual rites employing dragon bones, fossilized animal bones, said to have powerful qi or life energy, were also mentioned in ancient Chinese writings. To make a sort of early therapeutic paste, These bones were pulverized into powders and occasionally combined with wine or herbs. Although there is no evidence of tooth extraction or surgical intervention in early Chinese civilization, this could be because the culture placed more value on balance and preservation than on invasive repair. Their emphasis on prevention, healthy eating, regular hygiene, and body-wide balance is similar to some of the best practices in contemporary holistic dentistry. The ancient Chinese believed that maintaining harmony throughout the body, rather than just the mouth, was the first step in having a healthy mouth. Oral health was not addressed separately in ancient India. Based on the ancient Ayurvedic medical philosophy, it was seen as an essential component of the body's general balance and energy flow. Some of the extensive observations on dental care, tooth problems, and cures found in Ayurvedic writings like the Karaka Samhita and Sushruta Samhita, which date back more than 3,000 years, are surprisingly in line with contemporary knowledge. Ayurvedic dentistry placed a strong emphasis on daily routines, purification and prevention. Danta Devana, or brushing one's teeth every day with herbal chewing sticks, was one of the oldest customs. These sticks originated from particular trees that have antibacterial qualities, such as babool, licorice, and neem. Before using it to brush their teeth, people would gnaw on one end until it frayed. Although certain rural areas of India still follow this custom, dental care didn't end there. Known as Kavala or Gandusha, Ayurveda also promoted oil pulling, which involves swishing oil, typically coconut or sesame, in the mouth for a number of minutes. In addition to being a hygienic practice, it was thought to strengthen the jaw, teeth, and gums and draw toxins out of the body. According to recent research, oil pulling may genuinely improve gum health and lower dangerous germs, lending scientific validity to traditional wisdom. Chapters on tooth extraction, jaw fractures, and oral ulcers are notably covered in the Sushruta Samhita, which is credited to the surgeon Sushruta, circa 600 BCE. Sushruta explained how to use iron tools and herbal pastes to sterilize the area while doing surgery to remove broken teeth and drain abscesses. For severe cases of gum disease or decay, he also suggested cauterization, which is painful but methodical and involves burning the affected area with a hot tool. Dental conditions were divided into groups by Ayurveda, including Dantahasha, tooth sensitivity, Dantashakara, tartar accumulation, and Dantaveshta, gum irritation. In order to alleviate stress-related grinding or jaw strain, treatments were customized based on an individual's dosha, body constitution, vata, pitta, or kapha. These treatments may include dietary adjustments, herbal rinses, or even meditation. The mouth was regarded by the ancient Indians as a sacred entrance, a conduit for breath, conversation, and sustenance. It was not only a matter of health, maintaining its cleanliness, health, and balance was also a spiritual duty. Dentistry was a daily practice of body, mind, and spirit balance in Ayurveda, not merely a medical specialty. Ancient Greek philosophy, observation, and early anatomy all had a significant impact on medicine and dentistry. The Greeks, particularly from the ancient era onward, looked for logical explanations for pain and decay, including dental problems, in contrast to those civilizations that believed that illness was solely spiritual. Additionally, their doctors provided very sophisticated oral care for their time, despite the fact that they lacked dentists in the contemporary sense. Greek philosophers such as Hippocrates and Aristotle discussed teeth in terms of medicine and anatomy. The structure and eruption of teeth, the causes of tooth decay, and even extraction techniques were all covered by Hippocrates, who is frequently referred to as the father of medicine. He thought that dental disease, particularly gum infections and tooth discomfort, could result from imbalances in the body's four humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. For the Greeks, dental health was largely determined by their diet. Doctors cautioned that foods that are mushy, sticky, or too sweet may lead to deterioration. Rather, it was recommended to scrape debris from teeth by eating crunchy foods like apples, cereals, and legumes. Additionally, chewing mastic gum, a resin derived from the mastic tree, to clean the mouth and refresh breath is mentioned. This custom is still common in the Mediterranean region today. When issues did arise, Greek doctors used everything from simple surgical techniques to herbal cures and poultices. Metal forceps were used to retrieve teeth, frequently without anesthesia. Herbal sedatives like opium poppy, mandrake, or henbane occasionally helped to ease the severe discomfort. When treating abscesses, doctors employed lancing techniques to discharge the infection, which were frequently followed by disinfecting rinses with salt or wine. Although it turned out to be untrue, Aristotle's meticulous attention to detail about teeth was evident in his attempt to systematize human anatomy. He even noted that men and women had differing numbers of molars. Rare dental disorders include teeth that erupt later in life, or even congenital toothlessness were also recorded by the Greeks. Dentistry was seen as a component of basic medical education rather than a distinct specialty. Doctors handled everything from fractures to ulcers, and teeth were just another bodily part that needed to be examined and fixed. Ancient Greek dentistry was essentially a combination of observation, science, and pain management. It wasn't glitzy, but it was based on the idea that knowledge and reasoning could explain, anticipate, and fix the body, including its teeth. Ancient dentistry developed as a global tapestry of innovation, ritual, and resiliency across thousands of years and dozens of civilizations, rather than as a single linear science. From gold bridges in Etruria to flint drills in prehistoric Pakistan, from Mayan molars inlaid with jade to Ayurvedic oil pulling, early societies tackled dental care with a combination of courage, resourcefulness, and plain necessity. Ancient cultures accomplished amazingly complex advancements while having crude tools and frequently no pain relief. Although they lacked X-rays and the notion of bacteria, they recognized the discomfort that decayed teeth produced and took action to stop it, whether it was by drilling out the decay, numbing the pain with medicines, or creating prosthesis to maintain appearance. The groundwork for a medical art that would eventually become a modern profession was established by these early dentists or healers, monks, and artisans who worked as dentists on the side. The multidisciplinary nature of ancient dentistry is even more remarkable. In addition to being medicinal, it was also intellectual, cosmetic, spiritual, and even political. A brilliant smile adorned with gemstones was considered a sign of social standing or divine favor in certain cultures. Others believed that misaligned or missing teeth were a sign of a personal imbalance or even a sign from the gods. It turns out that chewing was never the only aspect of oral health. The tools that have been left behind, such as copper probes, gold ligatures, obsidian knives, and herbal scrolls, are pieces of a tale that spans continents. They demonstrate that ancient humans, who are sometimes viewed as archaic or superstitious, were inquisitive problem solvers. Many of their methods are still in use today because they observed, tried, and passed down what worked. We continue to brush, rinse, and floss. We make use of natural components such as myrrh, clove, and mint. Some even carry on age-old traditions like chewing neem sticks or oil pulling. They function not because they're sentimental, although stone drills and mouse skull poultices may appear very different from modern dentistry. With its implants, lasers, and 3D imaging, the objective is still the same: alleviate discomfort, protect teeth, and enhance lives.